Now, the new year is less than 2 weeks old, but a whirlwind of trends is already defining and shaping 2019. From the war on plastic, which has introduced paper straws, to disability representation with brands using mannequins in wheelchairs at clothing stores, a lot is going on. Let's help you understand it all. I'm joined by cultural identity trend spotter Khumo Theko. A very good morning to you, Khumo, and thank you so much for joining us. So there's a lot that is already happening.
Yes.
And if you're not a trend or trend-savvy person, I guess, what to look out for?
There's various things to look out for, and what we do at Flux Trends is that we have an acronym, TRENDS, which we kind of break down various trends that businesses need to be aware of. And so with the trends that I'm going to be mainly looking at, we're looking at the retail perspective and the social cultural perspective.
Let's get into the retail perspective. Yes. Let's unpack.
Yes. So essentially what we're starting to see is an evolution to brand activism. We saw in 2016, 2018, with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement and other various social cultural movements, brands were put in a position where they then had to put a stake out and say, as a brand, this is what we stand for and this is what we believe in. But now it's moving a step further. Essentially what we're seeing is that brands are now have become more conscious and are using an interesting level of marketing. Instead of waiting for a certain crisis to happen, they're already putting a stand to say this is what they believe in. And we saw that with Nike last year with the Colin Kaepernick ad that they had. Even though they got backlash, they still put the fork in the ground and said this is what we believe in, and as a brand, whether you're with us or against us, this is how it has to be. Is
that enough? And how should brands move in responding to a situation? For instance, when you think about Dove as well and what happened last year, how quickly should brands move in addressing the situation and taking responsibility, not just to say, yeah, okay, this is what happened, these are the thinking processes behind it, but to take responsibility?
Essentially, I think what brands have, like the likes of Dove and Pepsi, what they did is they jumped on the bandwagon of being in good PR, and that's not essentially what you need to do. It's essentially of what is the core purpose of your business and how are you going to then ensure that you're able to interact with the demographic that you want to interact with. So don't try create a hype just because something is there. Rather, if it is within your brand representation and is actually what your brand stands for, then it will seemingly come through. And we're also seeing that, interestingly enough, within the fashion industry. So this is an industry whereby for the last decade, consuming a lot, fast fashion has been the it thing. But now we're starting to trail back, and we're starting to see various organizations that are pushing for slow fashion. And interestingly enough, we're starting to see brands that are now catering to a demographic that actually wants convenience versus instant gratification. So it's the sense of, instead of owning the clothes, I can rent the clothes, still have the same experience, but now take them back. And Rent a Runway is one brand that is actually doing very well in that spectrum.
Rent the clothes?
Yes.
What's slow fashion?
So slow fashion is essentially being conscious of, I'm buying clothes because I need them, not because it's the latest trend that's on the runway. And like we've seen with renting a matric dance dress, I'm one who actually did that as well. I didn't need to own it afterwards because when I wasn't going to go to another matric dance and I wouldn't need it again. So what Rent the Runway has done, they opened in 2009. And they started renting out ball gowns and tuxedos. But in 2018, what they did is that they're moving towards casual clothing as well. So they're essentially working with brands such as J. Crew and Levi's, and they are assisting these businesses to use their inventory into a rental model. And this then opens that up into a new demographic, because you have a lot of people that want to wear your J. Crews and want to wear the Levi's and the Gucci and whatnot, but they can't afford it. So now you don't have to own it, you can rent it, wear it, and then give it back.
Are people conscious about what they buy and where they buy it?
We are definitely moving into that spectrum. I'd say millennials and Generation Z have become a lot more conscious of it. I think one documentary that essentially pointed out the detriments of fast fashion is a documentary called The Cost of Fashion. And that then in itself painted how a lot of people within the production chain of the fashion industry are being duped and are not essentially benefiting, but the impact that it also has on the environment.
Social cultural trends, what are those?
So this is what is essentially happening within society and how society is responding to various challenges that we face. So in the last few years, we've seen the call for identity and the acceptance of identity, gender binary as well. And now what we're doing is that we're moving into a phase where it's not just calling for identity and diversity, but inclusive identity and inclusive diversity. And essentially what's happening is that we have started to note that it's not just talking about people's gender, but also maybe talking about people's disabilities and their representation. And we don't always think about that. We sometimes miss that when we have the conversation of inclusivity, and that's what we're going to see a lot of in 2019. So for example, a company called Oath, that is the parent company to Yahoo, actually teamed up with Getty Images, and they then released a collection of imagery that specifically depicted people with disabilities in their everyday settings, because there are 1 in 5 people within globally that have a physical disability, but they're not represented within the internet when you actually research, and it's not something that portrays that people's lives still move on and they still live a good life as well.
Sure. Is it going to be a trend, or is it going to be cool to be good people again, and to be a society that thinks of the next person? I ask you that because we are here. And we are here when something happens, someone in front of you, and you're like taking a video so you can post it on social media.
I think we're at very two extremes. So you have those that are very conscious and that want to be better people. You see it in terms of the health trend. You're more conscious of what you eat, you're more conscious of what you put on your skin, and essentially you're doing that not just for yourself, but because you want to preserve the environment. And then you have the other spectrum that's just YOLO. You know, and they just want to keep on living, and they're living the good life. So we are at two extremes. Hopefully at some point we will get to a middle ground. But essentially what social media has done is that it's created cohorts, for the good and maybe for the bad, where people have specific needs and have specific desires and want safe spaces, and we've been able to create those safe spaces and create those cohorts on social media. So that in itself has played a positive light. So hopefully that will then get to a middle ground where we can all just be kumbaya.
What are you looking forward to the most this year?
I'm interested to see how Brexit is going to come out and the impact that that's going to have, and essentially also how the 2019 polls in South Africa are going to play out.
Are you voting?
I am definitely voting.
Great.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much
Thank you
for coming through
me.
to chatting to us. That was trend spotter Khumo Theko. We're back with